Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sergio Lugo, and I'm representing the Rocky Mountain Philatelic Library and the Topical Philatelists in Colorado in this presentation on Beyond Mourning Covers. The subject explores auxiliary services that can be found in postal history and postal material on funeral services beyond the subject of mourning covers. This is a subject of mine and an interest I developed after focusing in on mourning covers and as I began discovering other things. So what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about a installment 2 or part 2 of my presentations on mourning covers, and I start exploring beyond mourning covers. And let me stress beyond here. There are a variety of materials that are available on the philatelic market, on the postal market, that you'll be surprised at. But I'm also going to focus in on, by the way, things that you can spot off at a glance. It'll be at the very end of the presentation on mourning covers. Things that at a glance will tell you what it is and some information that you can find out about it. What are we talking about? We are talking about a whole host of subjects, and I'm going to try and touch upon them real quickly here in the course of the presentation. We are talking about materials from funeral homes. We're talking about materials from undertakers. We're talking about materials from caskets and coffin makers. We're talking about monuments. We are also talking about insurance, of all things, and you'll be surprised at it. And finally, we're going to talk about tips to mourning covers with greater meaning than meets the eye. Let's begin with the first cover that I had. This is an example of a funeral home cover. It was censored by United States censors in 1945. It contains 3 Colombian stamp issues common at the time, and it contains an ailmail marking. These became common in all countries after 1925, that is, funeral home covers, but they are typically not as fanciful as this example. In this example, you'll see El funeral barato. What does barato mean? Cheap. The cheap and or inexpensive funeral. That's a universal goal of all folks that are responsible for funerals and funeral arrangements. But this is an elaborate one, which is quite attractive, I think you can see. Funeral home covers are among the most common beyond items that you'll find. But they're not presented in heavy numbers here because we've got many of other things to do and present that deal with beyond materials. In this case, what you have is a funeral home cover that has an added meaning to it. And I'm not quite sure what the added meaning is to it, but you can see that it was sent by an attorney at law. He must have been contending some kind of business with the recipient of the letter, Walter Fitzgerald, on behalf of the McBreedy and McCormick Funeral Home in 1919. Other examples of funeral home covers are such things as blotters. The blotter up above is from the Adams Funeral Home, and among other things, they provided invalid care with clean linens and warm blankets. On the other hand, some other funeral homes were managed by one individual, and in this instance, you've got funeral director William Necker in 1913 operating from 22 funeral homes in New York City and the environs. So he must have been a quite busy man. There are extraordinary funerals that you might bear in mind, etc., that are not associated with funeral homes. Here you have 2 examples of extraordinary funerals, and what they are postcards. The upper left commemorates a funeral conducted in 1944 by a British military officer in, of all places, Sweden. If you check the postcard real quick, you'll see that there are 5 caskets in the background, which tells me that this is an air crew that was shot down somewhere near Sweden, either over Sweden or near Sweden, and they crashed and their bodies were recovered and buried. Very unusual funeral scene, if you want to put it that way. On the right is an even more unusual card or cards associated with funerals, and these are the results of Zeppelin bombings in Paris on 1915. Now imagine yourself Civilians are not subject to bombardment, but here they begin being subjected to bombardment in 1915 from Zeppelins. The outrage was widespread, much similar to submarine warfare. And what you have here is a memorialization of at least 3 civilians that were killed in Paris in 1915. Let's switch now from funerals and funeral homes to undertakers. In this instance, you've got a number of covers, and these are the most frequently seen covers other than funeral home covers that you'll find. The upper left-hand side in 1907, you'll see a note from an undertaker and an embalmer to the recipient. On the right-hand side, same thing in 1917, except detailed within it is an enclosure of the bills associated with the service provided by the undertaker. At the bottom left is an unusual one from the 1850s. It's either a U.S. number 10, 11, or 26 stamp in which Tuscaloosa, Alabama undertaker was writing to someone within the state. At the bottom right, you'll find 3 partners that formed an undertaking firm, and they also sold furniture. And this was in 1906, and it's franked with the medallion stamp, number 318. Another set of undertaker covers are shown here. At the upper left, you've got one from 1895. It's also from a furnishing undertaker. So what I think you found in the case of undertakers is that they'll provide furniture for the homes, since many homes were then conducting funerals as well as funeral homes. At the upper right is an 1898 cover, also from a furnishing undertaker. At the bottom right is a postcard from about the late 1870s that was sent to an undertaker, and at the bottom left is a man of many talents. That man, in the 1880s, not only provided undertaking services, but also provided fishing tackle and paints. You'll find that many undertakers were multi-talented in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Switching from undertaker to embalmers, this is one of the very few covers I've ever been able to find, etc., is on embalmers. And this is a college that provided instructional services for embalming in Ohio. It was canceled with a fancy mechanical cancel. And the X mark, I believe, means that the book and or the services were delivered to the recipient of the cover. Tell me the differences between a casket and a coffin. Rectangular shape, coffin. Body-shaped, casket. The one on the left is a casket. The one on the right is a coffin. What you have is differences of manufacturers in some cases. At the upper left, you'll see the National Casket Company was advertising its products and its material with its corner card for a casket company in 1898. On the upper right, you'll find that the Lookhart Company was promoting coffins, and in this case, they used the first U.S. pictorial issue, the 3-cent Railroad of 1869. Individually, some companies specialized in caskets, and you'll find here 2 examples, but they gradually merged to provide others. At the right, you'll see a business letter, an enclosure of the National Casket Company of the cover you saw just a few minutes ago down at the bottom. And you'll find that enclosures such as this tend to be scarce with respect to not only mourning covers, but the area and the subject of beyond mourning covers. At the bottom left, you'll see one from the Dawntree Casket Company of Boston. And what you find that by now, by the 1900s, is increasing specialization on the part of these folks and these companies. They're not selling everything. They're not selling furniture. They're not selling hearses and everything else, but increasing specialization on such things as caskets and coffins. Here you have the Chicago Coffin Company advertising itself and its building facilities in Chicago in an 1889 cover to someone in the city. You did have manufacturers of both. And of course, it's the logical conclusion that they would start doing that. On the left-hand side, you see the Marcellus Company, and if you look closely at the letterhead, you'll see that the name of the company says Coffins and Caskets. And on the right-hand side, you'll see another one from 1875 and promoting both, and franked with Scott number 158. Here again is a continuation of being manufactured by both. In this case, the covers are separated by 1 year. Who knows why they were made a transition, but they were both out of the same company in Allegheny, Pennsylvania. The left-hand one, you can see the facility and the company's name. On the right-hand side, it's a little bit more vague, and you'll see that it's franked with 2 cents more. It must have had a bill or heavy enclosure in it to have been sent that way. What do we have here? It's just a comment that I'm making to you to keep in mind that purveyors of different material, and you've seen this already, dealt in different materials as well. So what you have here on the left-hand side is a gentleman not only dealing in coffins and caskets, but he's also dealing in cutlery, paints, and oils in Hazleton, Pennsylvania in the 1880s. On the right is probably a basket company, not a funeral company, but this basket company was providing services to a funeral home. And what they were providing were baskets for flowers and floral arrangements, etc. This is back in 1901, and it's a Shields Brothers basket firm of Bombay, New York. Switching away from covers and materials like that, we've talked previously about stamps, but we haven't talked about souvenir sheets. Now, souvenir sheets issued on the part of governments are generally instantaneous, oftentimes the very same day as the person died. I think there's an expectation that, hey, this person, our leader, doesn't have long to live, and so these materials are prepared in advance for release on the day of the person's death. And that's what you have here in the way of examples of both a stamp and souvenir sheets. On the left and the right, left is a mint version, right is a canceled one of souvenir sheets for President Wilhelm Pieck, the president of the German Democratic Republic, who died in 1960. Mr. Pieck had been associated with the communist Spartacus rebellion of 1919, and after 1945, he rises in power with the establishment of the German Democratic Republic. Another Soviet is shown in this small souvenir sheet at the bottom, and that's President Zapotaki, who dies on November 13th, 1957. And this particular souvenir sheet was canceled in commemoration of that death. In the center is a first day cover for President Mayarovsky, and I can't pronounce his name, and I don't believe I spelled it right here, of Czechoslovakia, who died on September 20th, 1937. He had been the founder of Czechoslovakia back in 1919, of course, was commemorated, and this was shortly before the takeover of Czechoslovakia. No memorial stamp is indicated there, suggested by fringe or black fringe, etc., but that's a stamp and the day it was used. People like to get carried to their funerals in style, and that's always been the case with the transport of funeral caskets and coffins. And here's a postcard. For those of you familiar with such things, hearses have always been elaborate affairs. Hearses are always an attractive affair, even to this day. You'll have at the bottom a couple of examples of postal history sent from hearse companies. And what they're doing is selling hearses to funeral homes. On the left-hand side, by Cunningham of Rochester, that's a relatively straightforward, elegant one. And on the right-hand side, a 1914 white cover tells you as well that they're also selling auto lamps and mountings for your hearses. You want to go out in style. We've talked about hearses and carriages, and here are some other examples offered to various homes and houses and institutions. At the bottom, you have the Brownwell Company advertising in 1880. It's flumes that were added to hearses. Can't forget monuments. Monuments have been there forever, since the very beginning of humankind probably, with stones. Well, the stones have gotten refined in the upper left-hand side with monuments. That one properly used the Nebraska overprinted Washington of the late 1920s stamp. At the bottom, you'll see an elaborate bronze monument display from Bristol, Connecticut, that was issued in 1909 in the early days of the Washington Franklin stamps. I would like to know what the Mutual Reserve Fund Company is doing paying a mortuary call. If any of you can come up with an explanation for this, I'd appreciate it, because I sure can't explain it. They may have been serving the survivors of the decedent, but that's it that I can imagine what they would have been doing. A very unusual item. I've talked to you before about mass cards. Here's a different form of an auxiliary material item related to death and dying. And this one goes well beyond mourning covers. Why they are brought up and used here in this presentation is, as I explained in my first presentation, sometimes, but rarely, do you find enclosures in mourning covers that consist of mass cards. In the center, you've got an example from East Germany in the late 1960s, early 1970s, telling the person about the death of this member that they knew of, and it was addressed to the United States. So obviously the person could not make it to Germany for the funeral and the card itself. What you have here displayed is a variety of mass cards, and you'll find thousands of mass cards throughout the collecting world. On the left-hand side, you'll have the elaborate ones of the 1870s through the 1930s, which were lace in nature. What they were was die cuts of cards, and the die cuts made the surrounding edge of the cards look like lace. And here you have some examples. They invariably had something about the individual on the back side. In the 1920s, you begin seeing the colored version appearing. Beginning in the 1930s and continuing into the 2000s, you have more colorful mass cards together with the information on the back side of them of the family member who had deceased. And at the furthest right, beginning in the 21st century, you'll see more examples that are more simple in their design, and the message is simpler in terms of the front, but they still have the information on the decedent on the back side. The most common document that you'll ever see relative to death and dying is death certificates. Most death certificates are embossed. They don't have stamps and the like on them. But in this instance, you'll find a death certificate from Austria that was provided to me by Steve Schweighofer. That particular death certificate contains a revenue stamp, as you'll see at the upper left, right next to the term death certificate. You will find death certificates from other countries, and I've seen some from the United States with stamps on them, and they invariably bear revenue stamps. And then there's the exception to the rule. For all the material I've been talking about, mainly these things are identifiable as something above and beyond a mourning cover. This one was not. This had absolutely nothing on the outside. The envelope at the right-hand side contained therein were these two announcements of the death and likelihood of a mass. I think these are more or less in the form of the mass cards I just mentioned to you. And these are separated by about 35 years. But you'll see they have very much the same kind of appearance and projection of the same kind of appearance. I've covered most of the things. Now I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on those mourning covers that we talked about and things that you can spot that they have a little bit more meaning and things that you can spot at a glance. Top left. Nothing indicates a mourning cover except the card inside. And the card inside said, "Thank you for coming." Bottom left. Memorialization of a massacre in Czechoslovakia, known as the Ledisi Massacre, in about 1942 or 43. And the massacre was the result of the assassination of one of the top leaders of the Nazi Party and the regime. Upper right, small tag. Small tag is probably no bigger than about 1.5 inches to 2 inches all around on each side, rectangular in nature. It was sent by the Columbus Coffin Company, and I really do not believe it was sent along with a coffin. It only paid 2 cents. It paid for something from the casket company, but I have no idea. Bottom right, another item from Steve. The only thing that indicates that it might be a memorial cover is the 3 stamps that were issued for the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, which set off the First World War. If you look closely at the cancellations, there are crucifixes in the cancellation. And that has a little bit extra meaning it was probably issued close to the date of the funeral service for Archduke Ferdinand. Some things that you can spot at a glance if you ever study these things or get into postal history. At the upper left, a cover from the French occupation of Germany in the post-World War II period. This is 1945 to 1949. In the top center, what's known as a ladies' cover. Ladies' covers are diminutive in nature, maybe about 1/4 the size of a number 6 envelope. At the upper right, a mourning cover that was used at the very outset of the German inflationary period between 1922 and 1923. Those inflationary covers at the beginning are in the hundreds of marks, and this suggested to anyone that it's very early in the inflationary period. At the bottom left, a very unusual stamp and mourning cover, and that is clearly a mourning cover that many of you would not be aware of, except if you had ever read scribblings here in the past. A gentleman by the name of Doc Davis resided here in the Denver area, and he had one passion besides his medical interest in his stamps, and his passion was the destruction of the 2-cent vermilion that you see there. Doc Davis was a friend of John Willard, and John Willard related the story to me that he had an actual urn sitting on his mantle in which he had filled it up with the ashes and remains of every 2-cent vermilion he had been able to get a hold of in 50 years of collecting. In consequence, that particular 2-cent vermilion is higher in value than the normal stamp should be, because there were so few of them left after he got through with his destruction. Very unusual interest, and the article was written in scribblings about 8-10 years ago. In the center, for those of you unfamiliar, generally when you see envelopes without being sealed on the back and a city marking in the back, and that is generally it was mailed within the city, and that's what that signifies. At the bottom right, another memorial card signifying the death of royalty in this German state in the 1800s. Some other things you can see at a glance. For those of you that like studying postal history, on the left-hand side is a cover used from New York City in the 1890s, early 1900s. For those of you familiar with postal history, the stamps were affixed in such a manner to signify a shipment of an item. And you'll find these stamps frequently on covers originating from New York City. On the right-hand side, a French military cover by a soldier. You'll recognize it first by the poster stamp, which is a regimental poster stamp used in France, but also by the stamp with the overprint FM, which is Franchise Militaire, which is the Free French marking for French soldiers. Additionally, at a glance, you'll spot at the left side a mourning cover for a member of the French Parliament. At the right-hand side, a very unusual use of the Cape of Good Hope stamp, and something you could identify real quickly as. At the left-hand side, cover coming from Great Britain to Egypt. And those of you that like studying postage due, you'll see that 15 centimes postage due black rubber stamp was applied. And apparently 15 centimes equaled 3 millimines in Egypt. So that was the equivalent, routed through Austria. On the right-hand side, a rather large mourning cover. That cover is roughly 8.5 inches by 4.5 inches high. Nothing spectacular about the front. It's a common stamp. But the back has got one of the more elaborate Memorial Day markings on it that I've ever seen. It's just a really gorgeous one and just catches your eye. For those of you that like studying personalities and royalty, this is the entire set of the Queen Astrid of Belgium stamps issued in the late 1930s. He was either a dedicated nationalist or he was a dedicated stamp collector. It's a beautiful, beautiful cover. Unfathomable to me. A letter from the British consul in Berlin writing to a gentleman saying to him, hey, if you want the information, you need to write to the Society for the Cultivation of Personal Friendships with Foreigners in Nazi Germany. All I can figure out the purpose of this is a death notice to your envelope or to your inquiry, because there's nothing in there that tells me what the subject is. And I can only figure out this was a death notice. Another one from the British officers, from the Royal Keeper of the Botanical Gardens in London to the Edinburgh Botanical Gardens in 1862. Nothing in it to suggest anything as to why it would be sent as a mourning day cover. Finally, I'll show you this one, and this was just a personal interest one for me. You'll find that mourning covers are not necessarily common throughout the world. This is the only one that I have and I've ever found from Puerto Rico. This was in 1918 to New Jersey, from a town that was not too distant from my family's birthplace, namely Yauco, to New Jersey. With that, folks, that's the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions? Anything you'd like to ask? Yes, sir.
Sergio, looking at the corner cards and your covers, it appears that probably up to a little past the Civil War, caskets and coffins were a cottage industry locally.
Yes.
And the people that, the carpenters that built them and everything, probably didn't have enough business locally, so they had to have other interests.
Yes.
However, by the 1880s, the corner cards showed some fairly large manufacturing plants. By that time, the United States had gone pretty much from an agrarian society to a manufacturing society with a lot of interstate commerce, development of the railroads and the like. So I am guessing that those companies were no longer local distributors, but were pretty much regional or national distributors of their coffins.
Yes.
And they're huge enough that it looks like they produced quite a few of them. Your question about the insurance company?
Let me come back. Let me come back for a second. Let me come back to your first comment. No. The industrialization of the United States had really become full-fledged by about 1910. Okay? And you're right. You know, you had a gradual movement away from the agricultural roots of the country to the urban manufacturers. And as I pointed out in one of the covers, increasing specialization on the part of the industry on the whole. Okay? And so your observation is true, and placing it in a proper historical context, you've done a nice job of pointing that out. Okay, Roger, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
The question you had was the insurance agencies were sending cards to, was it mortuaries?
It was a mortuary call, a visit by a salesman of some kind to a mortuary.
Okay, well, I'm guessing that if they sent letters to mortuaries, maybe they wanted verification of death certificates and stuff of the burial, because the heirs were no doubt trying to cash in life insurance policies.
That's a good interpretation.
And
that's a good possibility.
This was a way that they could verify it. The mortuary would probably have a death certificate on file and the like, and I would guess that perhaps they were just trying to verify it before they sent out payment to the heirs.
I'm just going on the basis of what we do today, and that is that information is generally provided by the decedent's family, not by mortuaries, but it is just as good a reason to explain the existence of that kind of cover back in the 1900s than anything else I can come up with. I don't know. I'll take it as one possibility.
That's pure conjecture.
Conjecture at this point. Anybody else? Frank.
This isn't so much a question as an observation, but I remember, and it seems to me it was late 50s or early 60s, where there was I wouldn't say a movement, but something much smaller than that, of buying your coffin and using it in your living room as a coffee table.
Go ahead, Frank. Go ahead.
If there's a question there is, have you ever seen anything that implied something like that on a cover?
No. But I'll be looking for it. I'll have to be looking for a coffin and casket being used as a coffee table in a 1950s home. As soon as I find it, I will modify my presentation to include such an item. To me, it's incredible that anyone would have done that. But you seem to remember something that was in my childhood.
I remember it was rather a bizarre notion to me now as well as then. It had a little popularity.
Well, that would certainly be a subject that would be beyond mourning covers. Anybody else? Anybody else? If not, thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you. On behalf of the Rocky Mountain Philatelic Library, I'd like to thank you for having taken the time to visit with us on this video. You'll find that this is one of a number of videos that we've produced over the years in the effort to provide educational services to the stamp collecting public. The Rocky Mountain Philatelic Library is located in Denver, Colorado at 2038 South Pontiac Way. Our hours are 10 to 4, 5 days a week, with 1 day of extended hours. The library offers collectors of every kind and to the general public a host of materials that are related to stamp collecting and world history. There are over 60,000 journals contained in 800 specific journals. We have a map room, we have special collections devoted to individual countries, and we have special libraries that are devoted to individual countries. For further information about the Rocky Mountain Philatelic Library, we invite you to visit the library or visit us online at our website,